Yeah! Hey everybody, welcome again to another episode of the ADHD Shop. I'm Ash, the engineer with more projects than common sense. And if you're like me and are stuck behind a desk all day, you find yourself always dreaming, but hardly driving. So this last month and a half or so, I've been stuck cleaning up my actual regular shop and moving cars around, playing car Tetris, and getting some of the crap I have on the ground cleaned up. So hopefully in the next coming weeks, we'll have a better visual of what's going on in there and some of the projects. But for now, it kind of kept me away from some of the other cool projects like this 1970 Opel wagon that was the subject of an episode a few months back. So this car, of course, is an old school 1970s four-cylinder carbureted car with vacuum lines and fuel pressure regulators and all sorts of old school stuff that still needs a little bit of hands-on work to keep maintained. But aside from all these projects, one of the bigger projects I have involve cars like this, a 2014 Fiat 500e, the E standing for electric. Now, my personal opinion is cars like this and some of the newer vehicles really aren't designed to last as long as they used to. Most manufacturers know that cars are only going to be on the road for maybe 4 to 5 years before either they get returned in a lease or just get replaced for something new with all the latest gadgetry. Now, aside from all the technical advancements they've made over the last 50 years, including powertrains and material quality, a lot of these things just aren't holding up as long as they used to. And this car, unfortunately, may not seem like a project, but it does suffer from the Fiat factor. Fiat factor, Fiat factor, Fiat factor. So what does a car that's 6 years old need to be considered a project in comparison to a 50-year-old car that is struggling to stay on the road? Luckily, not very much. As an electric vehicle, the only things I really need to consider are tire rotations, tire pressure, and maybe checking the brakes every so often. The project part of this Fiat is actually in complete contrast to what we're normally doing here at the ADHD Shop, which is anything with these carbureted and fuel injected cars, like re-engineering of some of the parts or engine swaps, or even routine maintenance like carb tune-ups or even ignition timing. The project part of this Fiat actually coincides with what I've been normally doing over the last 20 years, which is hybrid electric vehicle powertrain design and engineering. So doing an electric vehicle car conversion is something I've been wanting to do for my entire career. Over the last few years, we're seeing a ton of popularity in converting old cars into electrics. You take some of their aging engines and transmissions and replace them with something more efficient like electric hardware. The challenge, of course, is not only in the process, which isn't as straightforward as one can imagine. In some of these older cars, it's a little bit different. You can simply take a part and replace it with a new one or some used part. But in these modern electrics, however, are a little bit different. So rather than using tools like spark plug gapping tools or timing lights, you now have to talk to each component through the controller area network or the CAN system with the computer. And that involves some software and maybe a wire or two. But as we get more involved with this conversion, I want to probably talk about some of these systems in a little bit more detail rather than the process, which we'll also get a part of. But we'll see what they do and how they compare to some of these older parts that we see in some of these traditional gasoline or diesel cars, because there's a lot of unique parts like motors and inverters and more importantly, the batteries. And so, while I sit here and try to communicate with this vehicle, I figured, now's a good chance to talk about battery theory in a little bit more detail. But, as scatterbrained as I am, I really didn't want to make it as confusing as it really is. Kilowatt? My first attempt at something really didn't work and went a completely different direction.
Fellas, are you practicing social distancing while wearing a mask but still lack the confidence to attract new people? Try the Bulge face mask. The Bulge face mask uses patent filter technology to remove all those cruddy airborne particles, all while emanating a sexy, more confident you. Look at the difference. Try your Bulge face mask today.
The Bulge, call now. All credit cards accepted.
So for For all the times I had to explain battery theory, I figured now's a good chance to really simplify things, and figured there's no real way to make it any more simple than a kid's book. So here's my story I call The Little Battery That Could. Discharge. Once upon a time, long ago, or basically the early 70s, 3 chemicals, lithium, lead, and nickel, all walked into the chemical lounge for a night of fun after a long, hard week of work. As they all entered the club, they were immediately seated in a booth overlooking the entire dance floor and bar. Lithium, who is known for his ability to attract electrons, looks off in the distance. He sees a chemical who is so attractive, so he quickly goes over to talk to her. "Hi there, I'm Lithium, but you can call me Lee. I couldn't help but notice you from a distance. Suddenly I felt an attraction, but I haven't seen you around here before. What's your name?" "Wow, you come on pretty strong. Well, my name is Nickel Manganese Cobalt Oxide, but you can call me Nicky. Nice to meet you. Can I get you an electrolyte-filled drink?" "Yeah, I guess." "So what brings you in these neck of the woods?" "I'm here for work. I'm in a chemical laboratory." "Oh, really? I'm a chemical in a laboratory also. Been in the testing department for almost 50 years. Well, I didn't know you're that old. Yet you still have so much charm and electronegativity." While the others were dancing away, Lee and Nikki just chatted and got to know each other better. The weekend was finally over and they both went to work. The lab technician formally introduced Lee and Nikki in beakers, not knowing that they've already met. They began their relationship with different environments, including various test chambers. "Lithium is so electronegative." "Bro, I'm just the intern." "Oh, okay, well, let's mix lithium and nickel manganese cobalt and put them into a chamber. We'll call that chamber the cathode. Now let's put carbon in another chamber and call that the anode. Okay, well now let's put an electrolyte layer between them to keep the anode and cathode separate from each other. What if we put a wire between the anode and cathode and make an electric circuit? Now the anode oxidizes and loses electrons through the wire, producing electron current." "Bro, okay." When I was talking about electronegativity, lithium can really attract those electrons from the anode. "Bruh, that's like current, right?" "Kinda, bruh. What we measure is the same thing, just in the opposite direction where the positive charge moves." "Bruh, cool. So, what is voltage?" "You can think of voltage as the force used to push that positive charge." "Bruh, cool. So, voltage is like proportional to an effort to push electrons, while current is the flow of those electrons. Cool. Well, even cooler is when I multiply voltage and current, I get the total energy capacity." "Bruh, that's like all the juice in a battery?" "Hey, I think you're right. This is a battery. Bruh. So, what do they mean when they say state of charge?" "Well, state of charge means how much available energy capacity there is within the battery, based on other things like temperature or how much current is being used by the load." "Bro. Okay. Cool. Bye." Finally, after years and years of testing, well, pretty much the early 90s, Lee and Nikki finally decided to get married and have their first child, NMC. During their first checkup with the doctor, they all discussed their new bundle of joy. "Congratulations on your new baby, Lee and Nikki. NMC is healthy and is doing really well. We ran a few tests on him and noticed that his voltage sits around 3.6 volts. When we run some tests in our load bank, we notice that he has a unique discharge curve that isn't the same as other batteries. We need to make sure that this chemistry has some form of battery management system, so we won't enter these temperamental regions and thermally run away. Even with these limitations, NMC shows to have a lot of useful energy. And we got that energy simply by multiplying the voltage and available current, which is represented in joules." "But doctor, what do they mean by power?" How do you determine power, you ask? Well, the battery power is simply that energy divided by time, which gives you what we're most familiar with, which is watts. After looking at his charts, we see that NMC has a lot of capacity or available energy. So if we take that power that we just talked about in watts and multiply that by time, we have what we in lithium battery world call as capacity, which is generally represented by watt hours. Now I noticed your question sheet that you wanted to know why lithium is so special. It's special for a lot of reasons actually. First, they have a large capacity when compared to other batteries like your big lead acid battery that you'd find in your car, and they can also handle large discharge currents for different applications like electric cars. They also benefit from high cycle counts, which means that you can charge and discharge them a lot of times before they see any impact on performance. It looks like you also asked how these batteries are rated. Well, lithium batteries usually have what they call a C rating, which is the amount of discharge current per hour. Here, let's take a look at this. Suppose you find a battery that has a current rating of 100 amp hour. That means that a battery can potentially provide 100 amps for up to 1 hour. Any variation of that current has a corresponding change in time to meet that 100 amp hour limit before damage happens. A 2C would mean 200 amps of output for a half an hour, and a 0.5C would mean 50 amps for 2 hours. Does that make sense? Little baby NMC here has a nominal voltage of 3.6 volts and a current rating of 10 amp hours. That means he has a total of 36 watt hours. That kid has some capacity in such a lightweight shell. Can you give us another example, Doctor? Sure. Let's take a look at a popular electric vehicle. Say it has, 70 kilowatt hours in the battery. That is the same as 7,000 watt hours. If that battery pack, which consists of many cells like your sun, NMC, now has a nominal voltage of 375 volts. You take that 7,000 watt hour and divide that by your voltage, 375, and you can see that each cell probably averages around 18.67 amp hours, which is pretty close to your sun, NMC. What is this I hear about charging, Doctor? What does that mean? Great question. Well, lithium batteries may need its own type of battery charger to replenish that capacity. These chargers provide a constant current at a safe rate until the voltage hits its nominal point. That's called the constant current region. Now, after that voltage is met, the charger switches to a constant voltage mode where the voltage value is held constant, while a little current is added just to maintain that cell. Take it a step back, Doc. We're both a little confused. Can you explain what is discharging and charging means again? Come on, we're just chemicals. Yeah, I assumed that you guys knew about it. I'm sorry. You know, as NMC gets active, when you apply a load, he will slowly use that energy he has stored throughout the day. As the day goes on and with the load attached, he will lose capacity in what they call discharging. His state of charge will slowly deplete from say 100% to some safe amount like 20 or 10%. That's his reserve capacity. If he doesn't have reserves, he may get a little cranky, so you better watch out and make sure he has to go to sleep by that point. Okay, so that's discharging. I assume charging, yeah, you guessed it. Charging is the complete opposite. We'll make sure the nurse sends you home with his own personal charger that replenishes his supply in the way I mentioned earlier with constant current and constant voltage. By the time morning rolls up, he'll be fresh and ready to party. Thanks, Doc. That was very helpful. Cheers, guys. A few months pass and NMC is growing up. He's finally old enough to go to school, so he starts his educational journey at Battery Elementary. Go Cells! NMC left the car with his backpack and his charger. Remember to charge if you feel like you need a boost, his dad and his mom said. As he enters the building, two batteries come up to him and say hi. Hey, I'm Nickel metal hydride. Nice to meet you. Nickel metal hydride came from a family that was touted as a wonderful mix of storing large amounts of energy while low in weight. I'm lead acid. Lead acid was the bigger guy, but one you can trust even when it's cold or warm. His family has been in the car business for over 100 years, and that's why he envisioned taking over the family business. All three friends nickel metal hydride, lead acid, and NMC became the bestest of friends. As NMC grew older, he noticed he had a lot more energy than his schoolmates. One day upon coming home, NMC was sad, and he felt he was different from all of his friends. His mom came and told him, "Honey, we are all different, and we all come from different chemicals. Some of us may be fast like you, or just have more capacity. In the end, we are all batteries, and we all get along and discharge just the same." One day, while walking back to class, NMC noticed the track and field folks running around outside of school. For the next few days, all NMC can think about was, what were these kids doing outside? All he can dream about during class was track and field and running. One day he decided to watch the students from the bleachers. While he was sitting, two coaches who were watching the team reached out and saw him from the distance. "Hey coach, is that NMC over there? I heard he's lithium and a bunch of other stuff." "Yeah, that's him. He has a little nickel and cobalt in him, I heard. I also heard he's really consistent for power, for a long period of time. So if I do a little bit of math here and multiply his power by the time he goes from charged to discharged, it looks like he might have a lot of energy that we can take advantage of here at the team, but he looks so light. I wonder what he's doing up there instead of being down here with us. We can use a team member like that." The coach goes over to NMC and asks, "Hey Sport, you interested in joining the discharge running team for school? We're the Battery Elementary Cells." NMC thought this was a dream come true and didn't take very long to decide. He shook his hand and begins training. The coach kept a close watch on NMC during after-school training. He noticed his unusual performance gain over his teammate batteries. "Man, this kid just has endurance. He continues to be strong in these discharge runs. You put a load on him and he just keeps his voltage constant for a long, long time." As the season continued, the coach put NMC in various amount of races, which he won. He became the star athlete for the cells. The second coach asked, "Well, what if we put him in a pack or team events?" The coach said, "The only way we can do that is to find others like him. They also have to be training at the same levels of voltage and temperature, so they will all discharge current at the same rate. Otherwise, the strongest cell of the pack is not only holding up the team, but also compensating for the weakest cell." "But what about mixing NMC and lead acid or nickel metal hydride? They all seem to be strong," said the assistant. "These are different battery chemistries. Unfortunately, you can't connect them together, otherwise the same thing will happen between the strongest and weakest cell. Plus, if we connect lead acid to lithium to nickel metal hydride, we can still have a lot of current being used to support lead or nickel, and we could damage our star player." The coach made sure he managed NMC well by monitoring his health, his voltage, his current, and his temperature, and continued to cycle NMC in local races. He continued to be consistent and win many of them. Finally, the time came for the state finals. This was the biggest event. The coach decided to put his top 3 batteries, nickel metal hydride, lead acid, and of course NMC, against other contenders from different counties including NiCad, or nickel cadmium, lithium iron phosphate, and the ultracapacitor. The pressure was on. When the plug was connected, they were off. Ultracapacitor was ahead with a leaping start, with lithium iron phosphate and the rest of the team catching up. The crowd roared wildly as the competitors continued to race and watching their state of charge on the Megatron display. "Lead acid is following its traditional discharge trend and slowly losing power," said the announcer. In front of him is nickel metal hydride with still a little bit of fire, but is trailing behind lithium iron phosphate, but still ahead of the pack is NMC. As the race continued, the competitor's state of charge was going lower and lower. Meanwhile, the coach was noticing that NMC was running a little hot, but he had such a competitive advantage over his competition that he signaled him to slow down a bit and use a little less current. While the rest of the competition was nearing the end of capacity, NMC, despite being conservative in his output, still had enough juice to keep things going. Once the last competitor shut down, NMC was the only remaining athlete that won the race. When he came back to the benches, he was rewarded with praise and accolades. While his coach decided to thermally stabilize him with either Freon or ethylene glycol, NMC wasn't used to all of the media and recognition. He was so happy and felt overwhelmed by the interest. Immediately afterwards, he was confronted by a few talent scouts. "Hey, Slick, I'm a passive monitoring system. I'll give you the creative freedom by just watching over your voltage and current, and if anything happens, I'll just leave it up to you to manage yourself." Another talent scout approached. You don't want that. You need an active battery management system like myself. I'll monitor all your vitals, including your voltage and current and your temperature, and compare them with what the temperatures are outside, along with how you're being loaded, along with your overall battery health. If you feel like you're being overworked, I'll tone it down a bit so you can be safe at all times, and I'll ultimately keep you healthy in all instances. Oh yeah, that sounds cool, but what sort of applications? Oh man, I've got all sorts of teams that you can be part of. You'll be matched with cells of your same performance and same chemistry. We can put you in other cell packs like for cell phones, or even computer laptops, or even better, electric cars. With your energy capacity and power delivery, you can be anything. And so began the life of NMC.
Subscribe now.